What's going on, guys? It is your host with the most, Underdone Toast here, coming live. First of all, we do have an amazing update from the Toast family. Baby Sam has been born. He was born on September 14th at about 12:30 in the afternoon. A healthy baby boy, weighing 7 pounds 5 ounces, and he is doing awesome. Us parents are a little exhausted now that we have a toddler and a newborn, losing a little bit of sleep, but it is well worth it for the addition to the family. So, that being said, my apologies about the lack of uploading for chess. I will be getting back into that soon. But since I've had a little bit more free time sitting around holding the baby, taking care of him, I have been reading, which is one of my favorite hobbies. So this video is one of many to come in which I review different books and stories that have been told. If you guys want different reviews, such as movies, shows, or games, or anything else, let me know in the comments below. I would be happy to do that. But this is number one of many book reviews that I will be doing. So today I want to talk about a book that I read that has been on my reading list for a real long time, actually, and I hadn't actually gotten to until just recently, which is the famous Diary of Anne Frank. It is perhaps the most widely read diary of all time. It's a personal account of a young Jewish girl named Anne Frank who went into hiding with her family in Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. So I'm sure you've heard of it. A very popular book. The book covers about 2 years from 1942 to 1944, while Anne and her family lived in the secret annex, which was just a hidden space in her father's office building at the time. And throughout her diary, Anne writes about her daily life in hiding, such as the routines, the tension of the secrecies, constant fear of being discovered, and she also shares her inner world and hopes and dreams, such as frustrations with those around her, her dreams of becoming a writer and journalist someday, and her reflections on human nature as a whole. She was quite young throughout this. I believe she was 14 years old and 15 years old, but she was incredibly intelligent from what you could tell, and she, like I said, she wanted to be a writer, and she was very talented at writing in her journal. And through her words, we don't just see the harsh realities of life under persecution, but also the normal struggles of adolescence, right? She tells us about her friendships, her family dynamics, her crushes, and growing pains of being a teenager. And what makes it so powerful is how Anne's youthful voice is both honest and insightful. It gives readers a window into the mind of someone remarkably perceptive despite her age, like I said before. There are several editions of the Diary of Anne Frank, as her father originally retracted some content. Anne, being a teenage girl, talks about menstruation and sex and genitals and some other things. But the edition that I read is considered the definitive edition, which incorporates revisions that Anne herself made with the hope of someday publishing her work. This book has been on my reading list for a really long time because while I do have a large interest in World War II history, it's usually focused on major battles and events. So I wanted to read it because I wanted to more so experience history through a personal lens, to better understand what life was really like for someone living through it. So it's a story of things like survival and hope and resilience, and it's a very sobering reminder of the human cost of hatred and intolerance and what was happening less than 100 years ago. So historically, Anne's diary is invaluable. It puts a human face on the Holocaust and has educated and inspired generations since it was first published. So let me go ahead and give you guys my thoughts. The first point I'd like to make is how surprising it was for me to read this diary that came from seemingly a normal girl. Her diary didn't constantly talk about politics or the war or different battles that had been won, but it was instead just something you kind of expect from any teenage girl. It's filled with introspection and humor, candid observations. She talked a lot about her adolescence, different stories, family dynamics, like I said before. And reading through all of this, it was all interesting because of the stories that she told and the experiences of hiding. But it also kind of opened my eyes to just how normal and common Anne Frank was. Like I said, she was intelligent for her age, very intelligent, but she was just a normal girl going through this insane hardship of having to go into hiding, being persecuted just because she was Jewish. So that was kind of a surprise for me, but I really enjoyed it. She often evaluated her own writing, actually, just recognizing both her strengths and areas for improvement. She believed in her potential. One quote was, "I know I can write, but it remains to be seen whether I really have talent." And she actually always talked about wanting to be a famous writer. It was her greatest wish, that she said. And so it was a lot of fun reading through it and having her make references to her writing skills and how she wants to be a famous writer, and how after the war she's hoping that she can finish high school and go off to college to become a writer. And that entire time, like, I'm reading and it's seemingly just a normal girl, but she makes comments like those, and I'm able to say to myself, like, hey, it may not seem like your diary is a big deal, but it is something that's going to be read all over the world. Because throughout, she does mention several times, like, who's going to want to read this? It's just diary of me going through my usual day-to-day things. And that's a big lesson for myself, I think. Obviously, we're not in such circumstances where we're hiding from people trying to kill us, but it shows me that anyone who writes a diary can be known to do amazing things throughout the world. So as we read through the story of Anne Frank's life, she wasn't always in hiding. She wasn't always being persecuted. So a lot of the things that she was experiencing was also fairly new to her. Like I said, she was in the secret annex. 8 people shared very cramped spaces in it. And Anne and her family lived in these confined rooms. She even had to share her room with an older gentleman who I believe was a dentist. So there's limited privacy, almost no personal space. You couldn't even use the bathroom during the day because there were people working in the shop, and you had to make sure that they didn't hear you or else you might be discovered. And it was amazing to see the amount of perseverance and vigilance that Anne had throughout all of this. She was a very strong, straightforward, and honest individual, both with herself and with her family. And I think that that is one reason why her diary in particular has become so widely known, is because she would stay optimistic. She was a leader, and despite her hardships, she made sure to develop a routine that would kind of keep her sane and continue to grow. She would study things like French. She would write in her diary. She would do cooking, educational activities. They just celebrated birthdays like normal. So throughout all these different things, it showed that a family in hiding could make a life from it. And although it was a hard life and it wasn't one that they wanted to do, they still had a lot of hope that the war would end in their favor and they would be able to come out from hiding and resume their normal lives someday. But, and I would say that as I continue to read the story, it wasn't sad for me at any particular point until the very end. I mean, as you read through the story, you think to yourself, man, these are horrible circumstances, but it's also a little adventurous. They're all in high spirits. They're trying to do their best to make sure that they're staying optimistic. But it's not until the very end that it really hits you, because that's when you discover, like, what happens to Anne and her family afterwards. And that's where you discover that, like, hey, this very, very normal girl going through regular teenager things was swept up and taken to a camp and had to undergo these horrible conditions. And I think that's when it really hit me, was after reading the book and researching what happened to Anne after that final journal entry. So Yeah, you expect this book to be all about like fear and hiding and the horrors of war, but so much of it is just the thoughts of a teenage girl. She writes about things very personal to her, such as arguments with her mom, her crush on another boy that's living with them, her frustrations of living in these close quarters, and her dreams for the future. And those parts were pretty sad, actually, because she would say, like, hey, war's going really well. I think we'll be out of here by October so I can resume school. And as you're reading through this, it's pretty easy to forget, actually, that she was living under Nazi persecution because everything becomes so routine. And I think that's what makes the book so powerful, is just the contrast. Here's this bright, witty, sometimes sarcastic girl talking about the same everyday feelings that anyone her age might have, but at the same time she's trapped in an attic living in constant danger of discovery. So and like I said, her voice is incredibly mature for her age. She wasn't scribbling down some random teenage thoughts. She was a very serious writer. She dreamed of being a journalist and even began editing her own diary with the hope of publishing it someday after the war. So as she writes, you can just feel that ambition in her words. She wanted to matter. She wanted to leave a mark. And tragically, it was only after her death that her words were able to reach the world. But that was through her father, Otto, who found her diary and made sure that it was published. And for me, the emotional impact comes from realizing how human she actually was, not just a symbol of the Holocaust, but a real girl with her sense of humor, insecurities, ambitions, very strong will. So reading her diary makes the loss of her life and the millions of others during the Holocaust feel just a lot more personal. It takes the numbers and statistics that we hear all the time, and it turns it into something that's deeply, deeply human. Because after reading this, I felt like I knew Anne really well. I felt like I'd been through all these experiences with her, and of her having a crush and having a tough relationship with her mom and being tired of the people that she's living with. Then all of a sudden, I was reading it via audiobook, and all of a sudden the book just ends because she didn't know that they were going to be caught. She was just writing like normal, and suddenly one passage that was being read was the final one. And then it started to speak about the unfortunate demise of Anne after her diary. In closing, like I said, the most important aspect of it was recognizing that it was a very normal girl who underwent this and was caught and then taken to a camp and separated from her family. It was actually just her and her sister. Her sister died from, I think it was typhus, and then she died from the same fate just a few days later. And it's just horrible, horrible things that happen to someone who is so young, innocent, who has her whole life ahead of her. And that's just one person out of the 6 million stories of Jews who perished during the Holocaust. I'm sure there are many other stories out there, but I am so glad that I read this. I would highly recommend it. Like I said, I've loved reading about World War II for a long time, but reading this personal story was eye-opening to me in recognizing what it's really like to live under such circumstances. So guys, I would highly recommend you go check it out. Great book. Do the audiobook or read it on paperback, whatever you like to do. But it is near the top of my list, one of my favorite books of all time. Sad ending, of course, but it will change how you look at history. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and like, share, favorite, and follow. And I'll catch you guys in our next book review. See ya.